Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to tonight's story. Tonight's tale is a journey of growth, discovery, and the choices that shape who we are. It is the story of a young man named Aryan who set out seeking power but returned with a deeper understanding of strength, wisdom, and balance. Join me as we dive into his adventure, where he faces trials beyond anything he could have imagined and discovers that the path to true power is not one of domination but one of inner peace and harmony. Aryan had always believed that power was the key to overcoming every obstacle. He had trained for years, honing his body, mind, and will, all in pursuit of the legendary crystal of eternity. This crystal, hidden deep within the heart of an ancient forest, was said to grant unimaginable power to whoever found it. For years, Aryan had heard whispers about its existence, its allure, and its promise of strength. Now, finally, the time had come for him to claim it. But as Aryan stood on the edge of the forest, staring at the dense, tangled woods before him, he felt a sense of unease. He had trained for this moment, but the forest ahead seemed alive, breathing, waiting. It wasn't just a place. It was a trial, a living test that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself. With one last look at the familiar world behind him, Aryan took a deep breath and stepped forward. The cool air of the forest wrapped around him like a cloak, and the sound of rustling leaves filled the air. Every step he took seemed to draw him deeper into the unknown. He walked for hours, the dense trees offering little sunlight. The path was hard to find, winding in unpredictable directions. Yet Aryan didn't hesitate. He had come too far to turn back now. His heart beat with anticipation, his mind focused solely on the crystal that awaited him. As the hours passed, Aryan noticed the change in the air. The atmosphere thickened, and the sounds of the forest seemed to grow quieter. It was as if the entire world had fallen into a deep, expectant silence. He stopped to rest for a moment, wiping the sweat from his brow. As he took a long drink from his water pouch, he heard something, a soft, almost imperceptible sound, like a whisper. His body tensed, his senses alert. He had been warned that the forest was full of dangers, but nothing could have prepared him for the presence he felt around him. It wasn't an animal or a trap, it was something else. Something older. Aryan. The voice was soft like a breeze, but it carried through the stillness of the forest. Aryan looked around, but there was no one in sight. Aryan, the voice repeated, now more insistent, coming from the shadows between the trees. He took a step forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He knew he wasn't alone, but he couldn't see who or what was speaking to him. "Who's there?" Aryan called, his voice steady despite the fear rising in his chest. From the shadows emerged a figure, a woman, cloaked in silver robes, her face hidden beneath a hood. Her presence was serene, almost otherworldly, and yet there was something unsettling about her. "I have been waiting for you, Aryan," the woman said, her voice smooth and calm. "You have come far, but the trials you face are not as simple as you think." Aryan narrowed his eyes. "Who are you, and what trials are you speaking of?" The woman raised her hood, revealing a face that was both beautiful and ageless. Her eyes, glowing faintly, met his with an intensity that made his heart race. "I am the guardian of the path," she said. "The crystal of eternity is not simply a treasure to be claimed. It is a test, a challenge that will reveal the truth of your heart. Only those who are worthy can reach it." Aryan's grip on his sword tightened. "I have trained my whole life for this. I am ready for whatever lies ahead." The guardian smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "You may think you are ready, but you are not prepared for what this path will show you. Power is not given easily, and it is not always what it seems." With a gesture, the woman stepped aside, revealing a narrow path that wound deeper into the forest. It was barely visible, almost hidden beneath thick vines and branches. "If you wish to continue, you must follow this path," she said. "But remember, Aryan, the trials will not be kind. They will test not your strength, but your very soul. Do you still wish to proceed?" Aryan hesitated for only a moment. The desire for the crystal burned within him, stronger than ever. "I will continue," he said, his voice unwavering. "I am ready." The guardian nodded. "Then go, but know this. The path ahead will show you the truth of your heart, whether you are ready for it or not." With those words, she faded into the shadows, leaving Aryan standing at the entrance to the path. The forest seemed to come alive around him, the air buzzing with an ancient energy. Taking a deep breath, Aryan stepped forward, his heart pounding as the journey began in earnest. As Aryan ventured deeper into the forest, the world around him grew darker and more oppressive. The trees loomed high above, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked out most of the light. The path was narrow and uneven, and the air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. Despite his fear, Aryan pressed on, determined to reach the crystal of eternity. With every step, the sounds of the forest seemed to fade, replaced by an eerie silence that made his heart race. It was as though the forest itself was watching him, testing his resolve. Every now and then, Aryan thought he heard faint whispers in the wind, but when he turned to look, there was nothing there. As he continued, Aryan noticed that the trees around him began to change. Their bark grew darker, and the leaves turned a strange shade of violet. The once familiar forest now seemed alien, as though he had crossed into a different realm altogether. Suddenly, the path in front of him disappeared, swallowed by a thick mist that rose from the ground. Aryan stopped, his senses alert. The mist was unnatural, swirling around his legs like a living thing. He could barely see a few feet in front of him, but he knew that the crystal was close. He could feel it, calling to him from beyond the fog. Taking a deep breath, Aryan stepped forward, his footsteps slow and deliberate. The mist seemed to part for him, but only slightly, allowing him just enough space to move forward. He walked through the fog, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of the crystal or danger. The deeper he went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It felt as though the very air was heavy with expectation, pressing down on him from all sides. His heart thudded in his chest as the whispers grew louder, now clearly audible, though their words remained indistinct. Then, without warning, the mist cleared, and Aryan found himself standing before a massive stone door covered in ancient runes. The door was surrounded by a ring of flickering torches, casting an eerie light over the clearing. At the base of the door was a small pedestal, and atop it rested a stone tablet, its surface covered in inscriptions that glowed faintly in the dim light. Aryan approached the door, his hand instinctively reaching for the sword at his side. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. This was it, the final trial. The crystal of eternity was behind this door, waiting for him. As his fingers brushed the stone tablet, the air around him grew cold, and the whispers grew louder. They seemed to be speaking directly to him now, their voices more distinct, though still cryptic. "Only the worthy may pass," the voices whispered, their tone cold and distant. "Prove your strength, prove your heart, fail, and the path will end." Aryan's hand trembled slightly as he read the inscription. It spoke of 3 trials: the trial of strength, the trial of wisdom, and the trial of the heart. Only those who succeeded in all 3 would be allowed to claim the crystal of eternity. He had expected something like this, but the words of the inscription unsettled him. It wasn't just about physical power or knowledge. It was about something deeper, something that would test the very core of who he was. Taking a deep breath, Aryan stepped forward and placed his hand on the stone door. The moment his fingers touched the cold surface, the door began to rumble, shifting slowly as it began to open. The whispers grew louder, filling his mind with words he couldn't quite understand. The door opened fully, revealing a dark, cavernous chamber beyond. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on that pedestal rested the crystal of eternity, glowing with an inner light that seemed to pulse with power. But Aryan knew that the crystal was not the final test. It was only the beginning. As he stepped into the chamber, the door behind him slammed shut, sealing him inside. The air around him grew thick, charged with a palpable energy. He looked around, his heart racing as he realized that the trials were about to begin. Suddenly, the ground beneath him shook, and a massive figure emerged from the shadows. It was a giant, towering over him, its body covered in stone-like armor. Its eyes glowed with a fierce intensity, and its voice boomed in the chamber. "I am the guardian of strength," it said, its voice echoing through the room. "To pass, you must defeat me in battle." Aryan's grip tightened around his sword. He had trained for this. He had faced enemies stronger than this creature. But as the Guardian of Strength raised its massive weapon, Aryan knew this would be no ordinary fight. The battle began with a deafening roar as the Guardian swung its weapon, sending a shockwave through the air. Aryan barely managed to dodge the attack, his heart pounding in his chest. The Guardian's strikes were relentless, each one more powerful than the last. Aryan's sword clashed against the giant's armor, but it barely made a dent. He realized quickly that brute force alone wouldn't win this fight. He needed to outsmart the Guardian. With a burst of speed, Aryan leaped to the side, narrowly avoiding another crushing blow. He focused on the Guardian's movements, waiting for the right moment to strike. The giant's attacks were powerful, but they were also predictable. Aryan had faced creatures like this before. He just needed to find the right opening. Then, with a flash of insight, Aryan saw his chance. The Guardian raised its weapon for another strike, and Aryan darted forward, ducking beneath the giant's swing and driving his sword into the gap in its armor. The blow landed with a satisfying thud, and the Guardian staggered back, roaring in pain. For a moment, Aryan thought he had won, but the Guardian wasn't finished yet. It recovered quickly, its eyes burning with fury. It swung its weapon again, this time with even greater force. Aryan barely managed to parry the blow, his arms shaking from the impact. He knew he couldn't keep this up for much longer. The Guardian was too strong, too relentless. But Aryan refused to give up. He wasn't just fighting for the crystal of eternity. He was fighting for something much more important, his own belief in what strength truly meant. With a final desperate cry, Aryan summoned all his energy into a single powerful strike. His sword sliced through the air, catching the Guardian off guard. The giant stumbled, and Aryan took the opportunity to land a blow that sent it crashing to the ground. For a moment, the room was silent. The Guardian lay defeated, its body crumpled on the floor. Aryan stood over it, breathing heavily, his heart still racing. He had passed the trial of strength. As the defeated Guardian crumbled to the ground, Aryan stood still for a moment, his breathing heavy from the intense battle. He had passed the first trial, but he knew that more awaited him. The crystal of eternity was within his grasp, but the path to it would not be easy. The room seemed to shift and change around him, the air growing even thicker with energy. Without warning, the ground beneath his feet began to tremble once again, and from the shadows a figure emerged. This one was different. Instead of the hulking form of the Guardian, this figure was smaller, its features sharp and angular. It was a woman, clad in flowing robes and with eyes that gleamed with intelligence. She appeared to be made of the very fabric of the air itself, as if she was not bound by the rules of the physical world. "I am the Guardian of Wisdom," she spoke, her voice smooth and melodic. "The first trial tested your strength, but now you must prove your mind." Aryan tightened his grip on his sword, prepared for another challenge. But the Guardian of Wisdom raised a hand, signaling for him to remain calm. "This trial will not be won through combat. she explained. You must answer my riddles correctly. Fail and you will never leave this place. Aryan's heart skipped a beat. Riddles. He had never been one to excel in puzzles, but he had no choice but to face this trial. He nodded, steeling himself for the challenge ahead. The guardian's eyes shone brightly as she spoke again. Here is your first riddle. I have cities, but no houses. I have forests, but no trees. I have rivers, but no water. What am I? Aryan furrowed his brow, thinking. He could feel the weight of the riddle pressing on him, the silence of the chamber amplifying his every thought. The answer seemed to elude him at first, but as he focused on the words, he realized something. The riddle wasn't asking about something tangible. It was asking about a representation of these things. A map, he said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his heart. The guardian smiled, her eyes gleaming with approval. Correct, she said. You have passed the first part of this trial, but the challenges are far from over. Aryan felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was short-lived. He knew that the true test of wisdom would be far more difficult than a simple riddle. Here is your next challenge, the guardian continued. Answer me this. The more you take, the more you leave behind. What am I? Aryan closed his eyes, thinking deeply. He had heard this riddle before, but it was only now that he truly understood its meaning. It was about time, an abstract concept, not something he could hold in his hand. Footsteps, he answered, his voice filled with newfound confidence. The guardian's smile widened. Well done, she said. You have passed the second challenge, but be warned. The next riddle will test your very soul. Aryan's pulse quickened, but he steeled himself for what was to come. He had come so far, and he could not falter now. The guardian's eyes darkened, and the air around them seemed to grow colder. Here is your final riddle. What comes once in a minute, twice in a moment, but never in 1,000 years? Aryan's mind raced as he tried to decipher the riddle. He thought of all the possible answers. Nothing seemed to fit. But then something clicked. It was not a physical object or even an event. It was a concept, a small yet powerful one. The letter M, Aryan said, his voice full of certainty. The guardian's expression softened, and she nodded in approval. Correct, she said. You have proven your wisdom, Aryan. You have passed the trial of wisdom. Aryan felt a rush of triumph. The weight that had been pressing on his chest seemed to lift, and he breathed a sigh of relief. The room around him shifted again, the air growing warmer as the energy in the chamber lightened. Before him, a new path began to reveal itself, a narrow corridor leading deeper into the heart of the chamber. Aryan stepped forward, but the guardian of wisdom called out to him one last time. You have proven your strength and your mind, she said, but now you must prove the strength of your heart. Aryan's chest tightened at her words. The trial of the heart. This, he knew, would be the most difficult test of all. As Aryan moved forward into the narrow corridor, the air around him seemed to pulse with an eerie, otherworldly energy. The walls of the chamber flickered, almost as if they were alive, and his footsteps echoed loudly in the silence. He couldn't shake the feeling that something far more profound awaited him, something that would test him on a deeper level. The path before him twisted and turned, leading him deeper into the unknown. The soft glow from the crystals above dimmed as he ventured further, and he began to feel a sense of isolation that he hadn't experienced before. It was as if he were moving away from the world he knew, heading into a place that existed between the realms of reality and the unknown. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he reached the end of the corridor. At the far end stood a massive door, intricately carved with symbols of ancient knowledge. These symbols seemed to pulse with life, their meanings lost to time. Aryan approached the door, and as he reached for the handle, a voice rang out from the shadows. You have passed the trials of strength and wisdom, but now you must prove your heart. Do you have the courage to face the truth of your soul. The voice was soft but filled with an unmistakable authority. Aryan's hand froze on the door handle as he looked around, searching for the source of the voice. But there was nothing. No one was there. "I am ready," Aryan said, his voice steady, though doubt crept into his mind. He had come so far, but what was waiting for him behind this door? What would test the very essence of his being? The voice spoke again, this time softer, almost as though it were trying to comfort him. "Remember, Aryan, true strength is not just physical power or intelligence. It is the ability to face the deepest parts of yourself, to confront your fears, your regrets, and your desires." With a deep breath, Aryan pushed open the door, and what he saw on the other side took his breath away. The room was unlike any he had ever seen. It was vast, with walls made of shimmering glass that reflected 100 versions of himself. In the center of the room stood a mirror, a massive one that seemed to stretch to the heavens above. Its surface was smooth and inviting, but Aryan knew that it would not be an easy reflection to face. He stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest, and gazed into the mirror. At first, all he saw was his own reflection, his strong, determined face, his eyes filled with purpose. But then, as if the mirror were alive, the reflection began to shift. In the glass, Aryan saw himself as a child, lost and afraid. He was standing in a dark room, the weight of the world on his shoulders. The reflection in the mirror seemed to show every moment of his life, every choice he had made, every mistake he had ever regretted, his childhood, his struggles, the pain of loss, the faces of those he had failed, his mistakes, his anger, his doubts. All of it was there in the mirror. Suddenly, the reflection began to speak, its voice a distorted echo of his own. "You have always tried to be strong, Aryan," the reflection said, its tone mocking, "but in your heart, you are afraid to confront the truths of your past, afraid to accept the weight of your own regrets." Aryan's chest tightened as the words cut into him. He had never truly faced these parts of himself. The fear of weakness, of failure, had always haunted him. And now, in the face of this trial, he could no longer run from it. "Face me," the mirror continued, "and accept the truth of who you are." The room seemed to grow colder as Aryan stood in front of the mirror, feeling as though the reflection was pulling at the very core of his being. Every moment of weakness, every loss, every mistake, it was all laid bare before him. The burden was unbearable. But then, something shifted within him. Aryan took a deep breath, and for the first time in his life, he allowed himself to truly feel the weight of his past. He embraced the pain, the regret, and the fear, not as burdens, but as parts of himself that had shaped him into who he was. "I accept it," Aryan whispered, his voice trembling. "I accept all of it." As soon as the words left his mouth, the reflection in the mirror began to change. The mocking, distorted version of himself faded away, replaced by a version of Aryan that was whole. The image in the mirror softened, and the harsh lines of his past began to dissolve. In their place, there was a calm understanding, a sense of peace that Aryan had never known. The mirror shimmered, and the room around him seemed to brighten. The coldness melted away, and warmth filled the space. "You have faced the darkness within yourself, Aryan," the voice in the room said, now full of approval. "You have proven that your heart is as strong as your mind and body. You are ready." Aryan stood still, overwhelmed by the transformation that had taken place. He had confronted his deepest fears and regrets, and in doing so, he had freed himself from the weight that had held him back. He felt lighter, as though a great burden had been lifted from his shoulders. The door behind him opened, and a soft, golden light poured in. Aryan stepped forward, feeling the warmth of the light envelop him. He had passed the trial of the heart, And now, the final step on his journey awaited him. Aryan stepped through the doorway, his heart still pounding from the intensity of the trial of the heart. As he crossed the threshold, he found himself standing in a vast, open chamber. The space seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls fading into an infinite expanse. In the center of the room stood a pedestal upon which lay the crystal of eternity, its radiance pulsating like the heartbeat of the universe itself. Aryan felt a surge of energy as he approached the pedestal. This was the moment he had been preparing for. But as he drew closer to the crystal, something shifted within the room. The air grew heavier, charged with an electric tension. He could feel it in his very bones, the weight of destiny pressing down on him. Before he could reach out for the crystal, a voice rang out, deep and resonant, reverberating through the chamber. "You have come far, Aryan," the voice boomed. "You have passed the trials of strength, wisdom, and heart. But now you face the final challenge, the trial of sacrifice." Aryan froze. Sacrifice? What more could be asked of him? He had already fought through so much, confronted his deepest fears, and faced the truth of his soul. What was left to give? The voice continued, its tone grave and somber. "The crystal of eternity holds the power to shape reality, to bend time and space to your will. But such power comes at a price. To claim it, you must be willing to sacrifice that which you hold most dear." A cold shiver ran down Aryan's spine as the weight of the words sank in. He had come this far, but now he was being asked to make the ultimate choice. What could he possibly sacrifice? He had already lost so much in his life. His family, his friends, his innocence. Was there anything left to give? The voice spoke again, as though reading his thoughts. "You are not alone, Aryan. The ones you love are with you here in this very moment. But you must choose. The power of the crystal can restore what has been lost, but only if you are willing to give something in return." A vision flashed before Aryan's eyes. His loved ones, their faces bright with joy, their smiles full of warmth. His mind raced as he thought of the possibilities. He could bring back the people he had lost, the ones who had been taken from him too soon. He could undo the tragedies of his past, erase the pain, the suffering. But then the truth hit him. Would restoring the past truly make things better? Would it heal the wounds that had been left behind? Or would it only create new ones? Was he willing to sacrifice the future for the past? Could he live with the consequences of such a choice? As these thoughts swirled in his mind, the crystal of eternity began to glow even brighter, its light filling the room with a blinding brilliance. Aryan felt a pull, an undeniable urge to reach out and take it, but something held him back. He closed his eyes, trying to find clarity amid the chaos of his thoughts. His heart beat loudly in his chest, his emotions swirling in a storm of conflicting desires. In the quiet, he heard the voice of his mentor, a figure who had shaped him, guided him, and taught him the true meaning of strength. "True power does not lie in changing the past, Aryan," the voice said softly, a calming presence amidst the turmoil. "True power lies in shaping the future, in learning from your mistakes, and in forging a path forward. The crystal is not a tool to rewrite history. It is a means to create a better world." Aryan's breath caught in his throat as he opened his eyes. The mentor's words resonated within him, cutting through the fog of doubt. He understood now. The crystal was not meant to undo the past, but to shape the future, his future. With a deep, steadying breath, Aryan made his decision. "I will not take the crystal," he said, his voice strong and unwavering. I choose the future over the past. I choose to move forward, to create a new destiny, one that honors those I have lost, but does not hold me captive to the past. The crystal of eternity began to dim, its light fading as the room grew still. The weight that had been pressing on Aryan's chest lifted, and a sense of peace settled over him. He had made the right choice. The voice spoke once more, its tone filled with approval. You have passed the trial of sacrifice, Aryan. You have shown true wisdom, strength, and courage. The crystal of eternity is not meant to be possessed by one who seeks to alter the past, but by one who understands that the future is a canvas waiting to be painted with the brush of destiny. Aryan stood tall, his heart filled with a sense of purpose he had never known before. The trials had tested him in ways he never imagined, but they had also shaped him into the person he was meant to be. He had learned that true power was not in the ability to change the past, but in the strength to create a future worth living. As the crystal of eternity faded into the ether, Aryan turned and walked toward the exit, knowing that his journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more trials, but he was ready. He had faced the darkness within himself and emerged victorious. He had chosen the path of the future, and with it, he would forge his destiny. Outro. Thank you for listening, dear friends, and for joining Aryan on his journey through the trials of strength, wisdom, heart, and sacrifice. We hope this tale has inspired you to embrace the challenges in your own life, to find the courage to face your fears, and to choose the future with an open heart. Until next time, remember that the true power lies within you to shape your destiny, to create the life you desire, and to always move forward with strength and grace. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with light.